January 2nd, 1909, Volume 8. More about earthquakes. The sacramental lot of Jesus under the rubble is less hard than in many tabernacles. To my great repugnance and only to obey, I continue to tell what has happened from December 28th regarding the earthquake. I was thinking to myself about the lot of so many poor people alive under the rocks, and about the lot of my Lord in the sacrament, he too alive and buried under the rubble. And I said to myself, it seems as if the Lord is saying to those people, I have had your same lot because of your sins. I am together with you to help you, to give you strength. I love you so much that I am waiting for one last act of love to save you all, not taking into account all the evil you have done in the past. Ah, my good, my life and my all, I send you my adorations under the rubble, wherever you are, and my embraces, kisses, and all my powers to keep you continuous company. Oh, how I wish I could come to dig you out, to put you in a more comfortable place and more worthy of you. At that moment my adorable Jesus told me in my interior, my daughter, you have somehow interpreted the excesses of love which, even while scourging, I send to the peoples. But this is not all. There is more. Know that my sacramental lot is perhaps less unhappy, less nauseating under the rocks, than in the tabernacles. The number of sacrileges committed by priests and also by the people is such that I was tired of descending into their hands and into their hearts, to the point of being forced to destroy almost all of them. And then what about the ambition and the scandals of priests? Everything was darkness in them. They were no longer the light which they should be. And when priests reach the point of no longer giving out light, the peoples reach the excesses, and my justice is forced to destroy them. I was also thinking about his privations, and I felt a fear in me, as if some strong earthquake were also to happen here. In seeing myself so alone without Jesus, I felt so oppressed as to feel I was dying. Then, having compassion for me, good Jesus came, just a shadow, and told me, my daughter, do not oppress yourself so much. Out of regard for you, I will spare this city most grave damages. See if I should not continue to chastise. Instead of converting, of surrendering, in hearing of the destruction of other provinces, they say that it is those places and lands that make this happen, and so they take their own good time, continuing to offend me. How blind and foolish they are! Is the whole earth not in the palm of my hand? Could I perhaps not open chasms in the earth and cause them to be swallowed in other places as well? And to show them this, I will cause earthquakes in other places, in which they do not usually occur. While saying this, he seemed to stretch out his hand into the center of the earth, taking some fire and moving it closer to the surface of the earth. And the earth would shake, and the earthquake would be felt, some places more intensely, some places less. And he added, this is only the beginning of the chastisements. What will be the end of them? January 2nd, 1919, Volume 12. Just as in Jesus, everything must be silent in souls. This morning my lovable Jesus made himself seen under a storm of blows, and with his sweet gaze he looked at me, asking for help and for refuge. I flung myself toward him to extract him from those blows and enclose him inside my heart. And Jesus told me, my daughter, my humanity remained silent under the blows of the scourges. Not only did my mouth remain silent, but everything was silent in me. Esteem, glory, power, and honor were silent. but in a mute language, my patience, my humiliation, my wounds, my blood, the annihilation of my being, almost to dust, were eloquently speaking, and my ardent love for the salvation of souls gave an echo to all my pains. Here is, my daughter, the true portrait of loving souls. Everything must remain silent in them, and around them. Esteem, glory, pleasures, honors, greatness, will, creatures. And if the soul had these things, she must remain as though deaf, and as if she did not see anything. On the other hand, my patience, my glory, my esteem, my pains, must take over within her, and everything she does, thinks, and loves will be nothing other than love, which will have one single echo with mine, and will ask me for souls. My love for souls is great, and since I want everyone to be saved, I go in search for souls who love me, and who, taken by the same follies of my love, would suffer and ask me for souls. But alas, how scarce is the number of those who listen to me. January 2nd, 1923, Volume 15, Prodigies of the Divine Fiat in the Void of the Soul. There's a postscript at the bottom of the page that says, "In the manuscript of Volume 15, the following chapters are not included: November 28th, 1922, December 1st, 1922, December 2nd, 1922, December 16th, 1922, January 2nd, 1923, January 5th, 1923. Luisa wrote them in a different notebook, as she had received from the confessor, Father Francesco de Benedictis, the order to write a separate volume about the divine will. This order was withdrawn by the same confessor after the chapter dated January 5th, 1923. So we continue. I was praying and abandoning all of myself in the arms of the most holy will of God, and my always lovable Jesus, coming out from my interior and taking my hand, told me, "My daughter, come with me and look at the great void which exists between heaven and earth." Before my fiat was pronounced, this great void was horrible to the sight. Everything was disorder. No separation of land, of water, or of mountains could be seen. It was one heap that struck fright. But as soon as my fiat was pronounced, all things rolled about, bumping against one another, and each of them took its place, remaining all ordered with the imprint of my eternal fiat. Nor can they move if my fiat does not want it. The earth no longer struck fright. On the contrary, as one sees the vastness of the seas, their waters, no longer muddy but crystal clear, their sweet murmuring as if the waters were voices speaking softly and quietly among themselves, their roaring waves, which sometimes rise so high as to make mountains of water appear, which then fall back again into the same sea. How much beauty does this not contain? How much order and how much attention does it not earn from creatures? And then the earth, all green and flowery, how much variety of beauty does it not contain? But this was nothing yet. The void was not completely filled, and just as my fiat hovered over the earth and separated things and ordered the earth, in the same way, hovering up high, it extended the heavens, it adorned them with stars, and in order to fill the void of darkness, it created the sun, which, dispelling darkness, filled this great void with light and made all the beauty of all creation stand out. But what was the cause of so much good? My omnipotent Fiat. However, this Fiat wanted a void in order to create this machine of the universe. Now, my daughter, do you see this great void in which I created so many things? Yet the void of the soul is even greater. The former was to serve as the dwelling of man. The void of the soul was to serve as the dwelling of a God. I was not to pronounce my Fiat for 6 days, as in creating the universe, but for as many days as the life of man contains, and so many times for as many as, putting his own will aside, he would let mine operate. Therefore, since my Fiat was to do more things than it did in creation, more space was needed. But do you know who gives me free field in order to fill this great void of the soul? One who lives in my will. My Fiats are pronounced repeatedly. Every thought is accompanied by the power of my Fiat. And oh, how many stars adorn the heaven of the intelligence of the soul. Her actions are followed by my Fiat. And oh, how many suns rise within her. Her words, invested by my Fiat, are sweeter than the murmuring of the waters of the sea, in which the sea of my graces flows in order to fill this great void. And my Fiat delights in forming waves that rise up high beyond heaven and descend again, more loaded, in order to expand the sea of the soul. My Fiat blows upon her heart, and of her heartbeats it makes fires of love. My Fiat leaves nothing out. It invests every affection and tendencies, desires, and forms in them the most beautiful flowerings. How many things does my Fiat not operate in this great void of the soul who lives in my will? Oh, how the whole machine of the universe is left behind. The heavens are astonished. Trembling they watch the omnipotent Fiat operating in the will of the creature, and they feel their happiness being doubled every time this Fiat acts and renews its creative power. So they are all attentive around me to see when my Fiat is pronounced, in order to receive their double glory and happiness. Oh, if all knew the power of my Fiat and the great good it contains, they would all give themselves prey to my omnipotent will. Yet there is to weep about. How many souls with these great voids within themselves are worse than the great void of the universe before my Fiat was pronounced? Since my Fiat does not hover within them, everything is disorder. The darkness is so thick as to strike horror and fright. There is one heap, all mixed together. Nothing is in place. The work of creation is upset in them, because my Fiat alone is order. The human will is disorder. Therefore, my daughter, if you want order within yourself, let my Fiat be the life of everything in you, and you will give me the great contentment that my Fiat may be able to unfold, putting out the prodigies and the goods it contains. January 2nd, 1930, Volume 27. Difference between acts and effects of the divine Fiat. How many goods an act of it can produce. Example of the sun. My abandonment in the Fiat continues. In carrying on my round in its works, I was feeling all surrounded by them, and each of them was waiting for me to recognize them as works of my Creator, so as to bind ourselves together with inseparable bonds. It seemed to me that the divine will, with its light, flowed in all creation, as our blood flows in the body, And so it flowed in all the acts, words, steps, pains and tears of Jesus. And I went in search of everything as my own things, to love them and recognize them as things that belong to me. But while I was doing this, my sweet Jesus told me, "My daughter, one who lives in my divine will is in communication with all things created by us, because my will is of all and belongs to all. Since one is the will that dominates and operates, all things are to it like members to the body, whose head is God, who has such bond with all things, because our divine volition flows as prime act of life, that they are inseparable from him. Only the human will, if it wants to operate on its own, without the union of ours, can break this beautiful union, this bond of inseparability among God, created things, and creatures. Therefore, my divine will is the bearer to the creature of all our acts done in creation and in redemption. It is the revealer of our secrets. Since our will is one with the creature who lives in it, how can it hide? And I, my daughter, how bad I would feel if I did not render you aware of my tears, of my inmost pains, and of what I did while I was on earth. And in my sorrow I would say, not even the little daughter of my will knows everything I have done and suffered, so as to receive the requital, even of her little repeated, "I love you," and give her the gift of what belongs to me. Therefore each thing you know of me, and you love as your own, I give to you as a gift, and making feast I say, I have always something to give to my daughter, and she has always something to receive. Therefore we will always be together, because we are occupied in the exchange we make, I in giving and she in receiving. After this I continued my round in all the good acts done from the beginning of the creation of all creatures, not excluding my first father Adam, so as to offer them, in order to obtain the kingdom of the divine will upon earth. And my sweet Jesus, moving in my interior, told me, "My daughter, there is not one good thing that does not come from my divine will. However, there is difference between acts and effects of it. Creation was an act of my fiat, and oh, how many beautiful things came out. Heavens, suns, stars, air, that was to serve for the natural life of the creature. Sea, wind, everything was fullness and multiplicity of works. In fact, one act of my divine will is capable of filling everything and of doing everything. The creation of man was an act of it. And what did it not enclose in the little circumference of man? Intelligence, eyes, hearing, mouth, word, heart, and even our likeness, by which we made him the bearer of his Creator. How many prodigies does he not enclose? Not only this, but the whole creation was placed around him to serve him, as if a first act of our fiat done in creation wanted to serve the second act done in creating man. Another act of our divine will was the creation of the Immaculate Virgin. The prodigies operated in her were such and so great that heaven and earth were stupefied, so much so that she arrived at making the divine word descend upon earth. That formed another act of my fiat, and this was my incarnation. And you know how it was the bearer of all goods to the human family. All the rest of the goods that there have been in the midst of creatures, virtues, prayers, good works, miracles, are effects of my divine volition, that act according to the dispositions of creatures, and therefore are always limited, nor with that fullness as to fill heaven and earth. On the other hand, The acts of my divine fiat are independent of them, and therefore one can see the great difference between acts and effects. And this can be seen so very well also in the sun, and among the effects it produces. The sun, as an act, is always fixed in its fullness of light, that with majesty fills the earth, nor does it ever cease to give its light and its heat, while the effects of the sun, that can be said to depend on the dispositions of the earth, are inconstant. Now one sees the earth flowery, with a variety of all colors. Now one sees it stripped and without beauty, as if the sun did not have the communicative virtue of always communicating its admirable effects to the earth, while it can be said that it is the earth's fault. The sun lacks nothing. What it was yesterday, it is today, and will be. Now when I see you go around also in the effects of my divine fiat, as though wanting to miss nothing, so as to enclose them in it and give it the homages, the love of the effects it produces, to ask it to come upon earth to reign, you dispose our will to form another act of it. In fact, you must know that the fiat voluntas tua on earth as it is in heaven will be another act of our supreme fiat. It will not be an effect, but an act, but with such magnificence that all will remain stupefied. Now, you must know that man was created by us with this prodigy. He was to possess within himself our continuous act of divine will. By rejecting it, he lost the act, and remained with the effects, because we knew that just as the earth cannot live without at least the effects that the sun produces, if it does not want to live in the fullness of its light and of its heat, so could man not live without at least the effects of our divine will, since he had rejected the life of it. Therefore, its kingdom will be nothing other than calling back the continuous act of our divine fiat operating in the creature. And this is the reason for my long speaking about it. It is nothing other than the beginning of the continuous act of my divine fiat, that never ends when it wants to operate in the creature, and is so manifold in the works, in the beauty, in the grace, and in the light, that its boundaries cannot be seen. Therefore, continue going around in everything that my divine fiat has done and produces, and never tire if you want to obtain a kingdom so holy. Then he added, My daughter, just as the effects are produced by my soul and one will, and they act according to the dispositions of the creature, so the acts of our divine will, independent of them, are produced by the unity of the single act of our divine fiat. So in us, the act is always one, because in us there is no progression of acts. And if to the creature it seems that now we do the creation, now the redemption, and now we want to form the kingdom of our divine will in the midst of creatures, it is the manifestation that we make to them of what our soul in one act possesses, such that, while to them it seems that we do and issue many distinct acts, for us everything was enclosed in one single act. In the unity of our divine volition, that encloses one single act, nothing can escape it. It encloses everything. It does everything. It embraces everything. And it is always one single act. Therefore, both the effects that our fiat produces and the acts of it always start from the unity of our soul and one act. January 2nd, 1934, Volume 33. When the soul does the divine will, God can do freely what he wants to do in her. He operates the greatest things because he finds the capacity, the space, for what he wants to give to the creatures. My little soul, although it swims in the sea of the divine will, yet I feel the transfixing nail of the privations of my sweet Jesus. My God, what excruciating suffering! What torture my sorrowful existence! Oh, how I would want to shed rivers of tears! I would want, if it were possible, to transform the immensity of the divine will itself into bitter weeping, in order to move my sweet Jesus to pity, because he steals away from me without ever telling me good-bye, without telling me the place of his residence, nor letting me see the way, the imprint of his steps, in order to be able to catch up to him again. My God, my Jesus, how are you not moved to compassion by this little exiled one, tortured only for you and because of you? But while I was delirious because of his privation, I thought to myself about the divine will, and I feared that its dominion, its life, might not be in me, and therefore my eternal love Jesus leaves me, hiding himself, and does not take care of me. And from the heart I asked him pardon. And my beloved Jesus, after much hardship, having compassion on me because I could not take any more, returned for a little while, and looking at me with love, all goodness, he told me, "My little daughter of my divine volition, one sees that you are little, and it is enough that I make a little stop that you get lost. You fear, you doubt, you oppress yourself. But do you know where you get lost? In my own will. And I, in seeing you in it, I do not rush to come, because I know that you are in a secure place. Now you must know that when the soul does my divine will, I can freely do in the soul what I want to operate the greatest things. My volition empties her of everything for me, and forms for me the space for where I can place the sanctity of my one infinite act. And the soul places herself at our disposition. Our will has matured her, and has made her adaptable to it, and it is possible for her to receive the creating and operating virtue of our Supreme Being. On the other hand, when one does not do my divine will, we must adapt ourselves, restrict ourselves, nor can we be abundant according to our divine way. We have to give our graces, sip by sip, while we can give rivers. Oh, how operating in one who does not do our will weighs on us. If we want to make ourselves known, she renders herself incapable, because the human intelligence without our will is like a foggy sky that, obscuring the beautiful light of reason, is as blind before the light of our knowledges. In fact, she will be in the midst of the light, but incapable of understanding anything about it. She will always be illiterate before the light of our truths. If we want to give our sanctity, goodness, and love, we must give them in little doses, as broken into small pieces, because the human volition is encumbered with miseries, with weaknesses and defects. Therefore it renders itself incapable and even unworthy of receiving our gifts and what we want to give him. Poor human volition, without our will, she does not know how to adapt herself to receiving the virtue of our creative works, the strong embraces of her Creator, our loving stratagems, the wounds of our love. And many times she tires our divine patience, and constrains us to not be able to give her anything. And if our love constrains us to give something, for her it is like a food that she does not know how to digest, because not being united with our will, she lacks the digestive strength and virtue to digest what pertains to us. Therefore one immediately sees when there is not our will in the soul. True good is not for her. She is blind and becomes more stupid before the light of my truths, nor does she want to know them. Rather she looks at them as if they did not pertain to her. It is all the opposite for one who does and lives in my will. January 2nd, 1938, Volume 35. In the divine will, miseries and weaknesses turn into the most beautiful conquests. All that is done in the divine volition is first formed in heaven. The entire celestial court participates, and these acts descend to benefit the earth. I continue my flight in the divine volition, thinking to myself, living in the divine will is almost unbelievable. How can one live in it, when the miseries and the weaknesses that one feels, the encounters, the circumstances are so many that, even while one feels them, it seems that the divine will wants to invest all with its light, and burn everything up with its love, so that nothing other than its will and love may exist between itself and the creature. But as I was thinking this, my dear Jesus, who is always on guard to spot anything passing in me that is not his will, said, "My good daughter, my jealousy for one who lives in my will is such that I do not tolerate one thought, one weakness, or anything else that does not have life in it. You must know that to begin living in my will takes a decision on the part of God, and a firm decision on the part of the creature to live in it. Now, this decision is animated by a new life, a new divine strength, so as to render the creature unconquerable by any evils or circumstances of life. This decision is not subject to changes, because when we decide, we do not deal with children who play with their decisions, but with the one who we know must persevere. Therefore we give of ourselves so that she may not give up. She may feel the miseries, the evils, and the weaknesses, but this doesn't mean anything, since these things die before the power and the sanctity of my will. They feel the pain of death and run away, even more so because the miseries are not born of the human will, that is sunk inside my will, and therefore cannot want anything but what I want. Many times my will even uses these miseries to make of them the most beautiful conquests, laying its life upon them to form its kingdom, impose its dominion, and convert the weaknesses into victories and triumphs. To one who lives in my will, all things must serve as the expression of the most beautiful love that the creature gives to the one who forms her life, almost as stone, brick, and even scrap material serve to the one who wants to build himself a beautiful house. You must know that before she enters to live in our will, we purify everything. We cover and hide everything inside our love, so that we won't see anything but love in this creature. Once our love has hidden everything, even the miseries, she takes her place inside our will. Further, every time she performs her acts, she is purified first, and then our will invests her, making of her whatever it wants. My daughter, in my will there are neither judgments nor judges. So great and so much is the sanctity, the order, the purity, and the utility of our ways, that all have to lower their foreheads and adore whatever we do. Therefore do not lose peace. Don't think about the miseries and the circumstances. Leave them at the mercy of my will, so that it may make of them its portents of love. After this he added, My daughter, all that the creature does in my divine will is first formed in heaven, in the eternal day that doesn't know the night. The entire celestial court is already aware that one creature of the earth took refuge in her celestial fatherland, which is already her own. But to do what? To enter into the center of the Fiat and call its power and its creative virtue, in order to give it the opportunity to operate in her act. Oh, with how much love she is welcomed, not only by the divine volition, but also by the most holy Trinity. They harmonized her to themselves. They embalm her act and blow in it with their creative power, making such great wonders out of that act, making the whole of heaven feel such joy and happiness, that all make the celestial regions resound with harmonious voices. Thank you, thank you. You have given us the great honor of being spectators of your will operating within the act of the creature. Heaven is widened by new joys and new happiness, so that all remain bound and grateful, calling her all together, our welcomed. This more than celestial creature feels loved by God with a double love. She feels inundated by new seas of grace. Just as she rises up to heaven, bringing her acts and letting God form wonders in them, so she descends again, becoming the bearer of all that God operated in her act. She floods the earth and invests the whole of creation, so that all may receive the glory and the joy of the marvels that the divine Fiat operated in the act of the creature. There is no greater homage, love, and glory that she can give us than to let us do whatever we want in her acts. We can do the greatest wonders without anybody giving us anything, and even without anybody telling us anything, just as we did in the creation. Nobody said anything to us, but still, how many wonders did we not create? But then, there was nobody, no one who could give us even a sigh as a pretext for our love, and as a refuge in which to place our creative wonders. But now, there are those who can tell us, and give us the variety of their little acts, even the natural ones, since nature is ours too, and we can use anything to form the greatest marvels in the creature. Our love gets more of a taste for it. Our powers remain more exalted in doing our greatest wonders inside rather than outside of the little circle of the act of the creature. After all, these are the usual pretexts of our love that, in order to give, goes in search for the opportunity to do it and to say, "She gave to me, I gave to her." It is true that she is small, but she didn't keep anything for herself. Therefore it is right that I give everything to her, even myself. End of January 2nd. Fiat.